Welcome back to my channel. I am Clara and I am renovating a 100-year-old house in Portugal. But here's an update of what has happened to me. So this is a little story about what has happened to me, and just want to make other women aware of the situation of what it can be like sometimes in Portugal as a single foreign woman. Sometimes it's not great. Sometimes it's fantastic, but sometimes it's really not great. Here's the story. So I am renovating my house in the north of Portugal, and obviously I needed a builder. So we asked in the local cafe about who they would recommend, and a neighbour was actually recommended to me to do the work. I mean, the work was good initially. He gave me Portuguese prices and not inflated foreigner prices, which was great. He came in and did a good job for a while, for a couple of months. He helped me lay the floor, he helped me put in false ceilings, he helped me knock down between two walls to make an archway. So all was good for a while. It was going really well. I was pleased with the work. I mean, sometimes he would disappear and not tell me what was happening, but that's Portugal and that's how some people are here. I didn't take it personally. He came back when he came back, and then the work was done. So I was happy for a while, and he seemed pleasant. He seemed professional. He was married with a kid. The kid came around the house once to have a look. So I felt quite confident in his professionalism. I felt quite safe with his professionalism, but all that changed one day. I did spot a couple of things that there were a couple of red flags. I saw that he had been checking out my personal belongings, because I had my belongings in one room, all kind of stacked together, and I saw that he'd walked around them because it was all sandy and dirty, so his footprints were in the room, and he had no need to be in the room. He wasn't working in that room. I hadn't asked him to do anything in that room. He had no need to be there. So obviously he was having a good look and seeing what was there. And also he didn't particularly listen to me. He didn't. And also he would do things without asking me if I wanted them done. He just assumed that he assumed that he knew better. Obviously he did know better, but it was my house and my decision, so it was his responsibility to check with me first to make sure that I wanted that doing, not to do it first and then find out that it wasn't something that I wanted. So his attitude was a little demeaning, was a little kind of, he knows better. Whether that's because he's seeing me as a silly woman, or whether he's seeing me as a silly foreigner. Those were the two red flags that I noticed before. So he disappeared for a couple of days and didn't tell me anything about what was going on. So I was trying to text him to find out what was happening. I'm English, so I was being polite and friendly, and sometimes politeness and friendliness can be taken the wrong way, I think, in Portugal, with some men over a certain age, and that age is 40. They think that when you're being polite to them, that you're being a little bit more than polite, that you're being interested in them. When I wasn't remotely interested in a married man, and one with a kid, and one that was working for me, and one that I was putting money in his pocket. I was just trying to find out where he was. So after the texts of finding out that he was actually in the countryside helping a friend on his property, because he had problems with it. It was during the summertime, so they had problems with the fires, and he was just sorting that out. So I wished him good luck and asked him to let me know when he would be back and doing work in my house. After that, he decided that it was a reasonable thing to do to ask me to send him some pictures. And he meant pictures of me. So obviously that wasn't remotely acceptable. Obviously that was overstepping a mark. obviously that was unprofessional. So I no longer felt comfortable with having this person in my house. I no longer wanted to employ a person that would be willing to sexually harass me so easily. So when he came back, I made excuses and I was like, I don't need you anymore. I don't need any more work after one date. So I gave him a one date when the work would be finished, and I thought we just went our separate ways, and that was that. However, that's not always that, because of fragile egos. He knew all about my house. Obviously, he knew how to get in. Obviously, he knew where the house was. Obviously, he knew where the house was vulnerable. So one day I went out, I did some work, and I came back and my house was robbed. So he'd been in, got in the back, and managed to take all of the equipment that I had, so drills, all the construction equipment, because obviously he felt like he was entitled to that, given that I wasn't paying him any more, given that I wasn't giving him any more work. So obviously he thought that that was his compensation for being sacked, for his compensation for sacking me, his compensation for sexually harassing me and then me sacking him. So anyway, I was kind of expecting it, because I had spoken to some people that had other negative experiences with builders in Portugal, and being robbed after wasn't necessarily an uncommon occurrence. So I spoke to the police and just made a report of the things that were stolen. And then I thought, okay, so he's done that as payback, and I thought that would be that. Unfortunately, that wasn't that, because he was a neighbour, because he could see me come and go, because he could see when I was leaving my house. One sunny Sunday morning, I took my dogs for a walk. I was literally at the house for 45 minutes, and he'd been in my house and he'd robbed me again. So he had taken the building equipment again, and anything that he wanted. He didn't take anything personal, he just took building equipment. So that made me feel extremely unsafe, because obviously he was watching me and watching when I was leaving, and decided that he could come into my house whenever he fucking pleased. So I felt really unsafe. I felt like my house wasn't my own. I was constantly like worried about noises at night. It was quite a difficult and scary experience. Anyway, I went to the police, and I've got to say the police in Portugal have been fantastic with me around here. They took my complaint seriously. They didn't do they didn't check for fingerprints or anything like that. They just took my statements and just had a look at how he got in. And that was that. But then the police did keep an eye on me, and they did go around to his house. They did find out where he lived. He lived locally, lived on the same street, but I wasn't sure which house he lived in. They did eventually go around to his house, as a few of them, and they warned him off. And since that point, I occasionally see him in the street, and he gives me dirty looks and says things to me in Portuguese. Obviously calling me a bitch, but I just ignore him. So the police were really good. They went round and they spoke to him. They told him to stay away, which he did. But I did also start a process against him. But the process didn't really go anywhere, because it was my word against him. It was my word against his. There were there's no proof that it was him. It was just pretty obvious to me, but obviously in the eyes of the law, that's not pretty obvious. So it just I guess it just made him think and made him keep away from my house. My advice to other people, especially if you're new to Portugal, is to keep your wits about you. I've lived in Portugal for a very long, well, I'd lived in Portugal for nearly 10 years, so I know about things here. I know that it's the same as everywhere. There's some good people, there's some bad people. But the initial vibe I got off him was good, and I thought because he was a neighbour that he wouldn't do anything. Well, I thought because it was a married neighbour with children that he wouldn't do anything silly, but that was naive of me to think like that. But anyway, my advice is to keep your wits about you. Just make sure that you're safe in your own home, because you never actually know what's going to happen. You don't really know who you're bringing to your house. You don't know who you're alone with. And it was, it did make me feel really uncomfortable. It made me feel really uncomfortable for a couple of months in my house. I was constantly worried about noises. Luckily, I've got the dogs to make sure that nothing would happen. But if I was single on my own, then it would have affected me even further. It has unfortunately made me really wary of bringing workers into my house, because I was wary before. I didn't want lots of men traipsing in and out and checking out what was in my house. So if I was to do it again, I would try and make sure that the person wasn't a neighbour, he wasn't local. See if I could get recommendations online, or I would see if I could book a professional company with a website where they have some online presence where it's much more kind of professional. Yes, so I just had a bad experience with a bad person, and obviously bad experiences can happen in whatever country that you're in. Luckily he didn't take too much, he just took the construction, he took drills and things like that. But yeah, it's not a nice feeling to feel like you're being watched by a neighbour. It's not a nice feeling to have someone come into your house, take your stuff. It's not a nice feeling to have someone looking through your private things. It's not a nice feeling to have someone that you're paying, that you're putting money in their pocket to see you, to ask you for pictures of themselves and to see you in that way. That's unprofessional, it's nasty. So it wasn't a nice experience to go through, but it's over now. So anyway, so after I have decided not to get a professional in the house, just until I feel safe and secure knowing that until I feel safe and secure having someone in the house again. So I decided that I would do the work myself, which is exhausting and tiring and comes with its own problems, because obviously I'm not a professional. Obviously everything takes me 10 million times longer than it would do a professional, and I make mistakes, so I have to do it all again. But it does mean that I feel safer in the house, so obviously that's the good thing about doing it on my own. So it's taken me a lot longer than what I had planned to renovate this house, but I'm getting there. I'm getting some rooms finished.